and welcome to Fantastic Fights, the podcast about a middle-aged man playing adventure game books out loud on the internet. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is a bonus episode made possible by my patrons over at patreon.com/HJDoom. These are kind souls who have put their hand in their pocket to support my nonsense and bask in the warm glow of supporting independent creators, and also the even warmer glow of getting a bunch of game books for their trouble. This episode I have the pleasant duty of thanking a new patron, DGN. Thank you so much for your support. It is deeply appreciated. This time out we're looking at Coils of Hate from 1994. It was written by Mark Smith and Dave Morris with internal art by Terry Oakes, a map by Leo Hartas, and a cover which depicts some kind of trippy human-absorbing worm creature rendered by Mark Salwowski. The cover is very much my kind of jam. It's got that new wave of science fiction paperback vibe, and that is an aesthetic I very much appreciate. This is part of the virtual reality adventure series of game books that is most notable for being the series that gave us Heart of Ice by Dave Morris, a book considered by many to be one of the greatest adventure game books of all time. I covered that on the podcast a while ago, and it is indeed fantastic. So the standard against which Coils of Hate is to be measured is extremely high, and it's fair to say that Coils of Hate doesn't bask in quite the same adoration that Heart of Ice does. It's notable that Gamebook Supremo Stuart Lloyd actually wrote an updated version with Mark Smith's blessing, which attempts to fix some of the logical inconsistencies which readers had taken issue with in the original text. I have tremendous respect for Stuart Lloyd, who is a titan of gamebook fandom, and left to my own devices I might well have played his remixed version of this book. But this is actually a somewhat belated request by listener James, and when we were chatting about the book, he requested that I cover it as originally released, and I was more than happy to oblige. Perhaps I might even play Stuart Lloyd's version at some point in the future to see what he's done with the core material. I try and play everything that gets suggested by listeners, so if there's something you'd like to see me tackle, then do get in touch. It may take a while, but I get there in the end. Let us take a look at the rules. The rules are nice and brief, something I always appreciate. One thing that marks the Virtual Reality Adventure series out is that they don't make use of dice. The books are purely deterministic, with your character here being defined by life points, which usually start at 10, some starting money, some basic gear, and 4 skills chosen from a list of 10. You can either use one of the pre-generated characters or create your own bespoke character by picking skills from the list. I usually like to start with the simplest and most violent character possible, so I've chosen the Avenger. The Avenger starts with 10 life points, 10 gleanars, the local currency, a sword, and the following skills: agility, streetwise, swordplay, and unarmed combat. Agility, swordplay, and unarmed combat all seem handy for my violence-based approach to problem-solving, and streetwise is sure to be handy in a game book set in the mysterious fantasy city of Godorno. With all that out of the way, let's play Coils of Hate. Prologue. You are down on your luck, but you will not swallow your pride and look for a job. Every day a throng of hopefuls gathers outside the rich palazzi of the riverfront. Others seek to join a trader's caravan as a guide or guard. Those turned away drift at last to the seaweed-stinking waterfront to become rowers in the fleet and begin a life no better than slavery. In your heart you know that your destiny, the destiny of a Judain, is greater than this. Not for nothing have you toiled to learn your skills. Now you are without peer among your people. One thing only you lack, a sense of purpose, a quest to show the world your greatness and put your skills to the test. The city of Godorno is a stinking cesspit. The Judain are not wanted here. Your people are rich, but the pale ones of Godorno covet those riches. Usurers, thieves, they cry as your people walk the streets going about their daily business. So I think it's already clear, and indeed well established, that the Judain are a fantasy stand-in for the Jewish community, sort of the Middle Ages / early modern period. Looking at the cover, it feels like the buildings are a bit more sort of Renaissance or even early modern than sort of old school medieval. And they also have a kind of Italian vibe to them, I would say, or possibly Spanish, but very much European, possibly with a slight Arabic influence, which would maybe make sense for somewhere like Spain. Anyway, the Overlord stokes the fire of discontent. When those who speak out against his cruel reign disappear, never to be seen again, he blames the Judain. When people starve because he sells the harvest to the Westerners for jewels and silks, his minions say that it is the Judain who profit from his people's wretchedness. Now the people hate you and all your kind. Soon it will not be safe to walk the streets. The caravan lines are swelled by tall, proud Judain slaves with their glittering black eyes, backs bent under casks of spice and bolts of silk. In the past 2 centuries, Godorno has become a byword for decadence, luxury, and idle pleasure. Everywhere you look, you see the insignia of the winged lion, once the proud standard of the city's legions. Now it stands as the very symbol of corruption and evil. So, a very evocative opening, and I'm enjoying how straightforwardly it manages to set up the situation. It only takes a page and a little bit to give you a tremendous sense of what the city of Godorno is like, what your destiny as a member of the Judain might look like, and the many challenges you might need to overcome along the way. Good work there. 1. Walk the streets you must, for there is no food and nothing to be gained from idling here in the hovel you call home. You push the rotten front door open gently. There is a wet, cracking noise and its splinters coming off its hinges. You jump past into Copper Street as it falls into the street and breaks. It is beyond repair. Even before you turn the corner of the narrow, mired street, a prowling thief, a sewer rat escaped from the fleet, is going into your home. Let him. You are carrying everything you own. He will find nothing but tick-ridden blankets and leaking earthenware pots. As you turn your back on the grey stone shacks of Copper Street, a youth, gangling and pasty-faced, spits in your eye and calls out, "Judain scum!" The boy is beneath notice. He sneers with his nose in the air like the rich folk of the riverfront, but his sailcloth breeches are out at the knees. His father is probably a tanner or a tinker or some such. Your time in Godorno has taught you to ignore such insults. If you cannot stand this treatment any longer, however, and round on him, you may do so. If you want to walk on humbly wiping the spittle from your cheek, that is an option as well. Well, I said I would choose violence at the outset, and this is exactly the sort of casual racism shown towards someone who should be an economic ally, and this is one of the things that irritates me most about the world we live in, is the way in which people whose economic interests are fundamentally the same are set against each other. And I think sometimes that is a lesson that needs to be unlearned by the power of pugilism. So that's what I will do. You spin on your heel. The fierce look of anger on your face makes the boy step back in fear, but he is used to treating your kind with scorn. He recovers himself. "Judain scum, your kind aren't wanted here." He pulls a tanner's knife from his pocket. It is long, sharp, and menacing. Do you have the swordplay skill and wish to break the law of Godorno by unsheathing your sword here in the street, or do you have the unarmed combat skill, or would you prefer to rely on streetwise? There is no time to cast a spell, but if you have charms and an amulet, that is an option too. Otherwise, you had better run. So that's a lot of options for punching someone in the face, which is all I really want to do here. So I'm going to go with unarmed combat. I'm going to assume that I am sufficiently good at punching that I do not need to draw my sword to deal with this malnourished ne'er-do-well. Your stiffened fingers lash out as fast as a striking cobra, jabbing into the cluster of nerves at the base of his palm. His fingers immediately go limp, and he drops the knife without ever feeling any pain. You snatch it up from the cobblestones before he can take stock of what has happened. A moment later, he gives a sob of frustrated rage and launches a kick towards your midriff. You easily catch his foot and draw it up, pulling him off balance as you step closer to look him straight in the eye. "I wonder if you're also the sort who kicks dogs," you say softly but with a hard look in your eye. "Beware if so. You'll find that we Judain are wolfhounds. We bite back. So saying, you give his leg a twist so that he is thrown over onto his back in the street. Pocketing his knife so that it cannot be used against another of your people, you saunter off in the direction of the Greenbark Plaza. Record the knife among your list of possessions. Excellent. This street winds down towards the riverfront and the centre of the city. It is crossed by large avenues lined with tall straight cedars that lead up to the citadel. You hear the ringing of the town crier's bell. At the end of the street is Greenbark Plaza. Here a large walled flower bed encircles a rare sight. It is a greenbark tree, 80 feet tall. The smooth bark is striped lime green and grey-green, and the heart-shaped leaves are golden yellow. There is a shrine here to the tree spirit with a few offerings of potash and wine. Next to the shrine is the town crier dressed in his traditional black and gold tabard. He unfurls a scroll and begins to declaim to the gathered crowd. He is flanked by a bodyguard of the Overlord's men armoured in black leather. You push forward to hear better. This is very evocatively written. What does the Overlord have to say, I wonder? Nothing good, I'm expecting. Now hear the will of the Overlord. The salt tax will be doubled forthwith. The crier's voice rings out confidently, but there are growls of discontent all around. A man turns to you and says, Doubled? Do they intend to squeeze us till we're naught but dried husks lying in the dust? Shh, you say, wanting to hear what else the town crier is saying. The amnesty for those who worship false gods is at an end, he declaims to the crowd. The punishment for heresy is death. There is a wail from somewhere in the crowd, and two of the soldiers barge their way towards the poor unfortunate. Townsfolk are knocked to the ground, but no one lays a hand on the soldiers. A woman dressed in a blue robe runs away up the street with the soldiers in hot pursuit. The crier affects not to have noticed the disturbance. Now hear this. The Overlord decrees the Judain outcast. The life of a Judain is of no worth. The keeping of Judain as slaves within the precincts of the city may continue. It is the wish of the Overlord that all good citizens of Godorno shall not rest until the Judain have been driven out or enslaved. A pogrom, a lovely, lovely pogrom. Constant feature of medieval and early modern life, and indeed in many ways modern life. You listen in horror. This means that none of your people is safe within the city. The crowd starts to chant, Kill the Judain! Kill the Judain! The man who spoke out with such indignation about the salt tax now looks at you and then points, shouting, Judain! A mob will soon be baying for your blood. There is a picture of the town crier. It's weird. It's rendered from beneath, so we're almost looking up the skirts of his tabard, which is a bit weird. Yeah, it's a really powerfully strange little picture. I quite like it because it is so odd. Yeah, just a gently disturbing picture of a man with a bell and a bit of paper shouting. Now then, what can we possibly do about this really rather dire situation? If you have the skill Cunning, that's an option. If you have spells and a wand, you could cast a spell of Disguise, or disappear in a puff of smoke. If you have Streetwise, that's an option as well. If you want to fight, you can choose Swordplay or Unarmed Combat. If you have none of these skills or think that using them now would only get you killed, you are pelted with loose cobblestones as you run off and lose 4 life points. So I think the only real option there is going to be Streetwise. Swordplay is all very well, but it's an entire angry mob. I don't fancy stabbing them all, and I fancy punching them all even less. So I think we're going to go with Streetwise. I am one of the Overlord's paid informers, you shout with a commanding air. Follow me! I will take you to the nests of the Judain scum. Follow me! You turn your back and set out towards the fruit market. Come, I will show where 3 Judain spies and embezzlers are hiding out. The mob follows eagerly, crying for Judain blood. One of them asks how they are to know you are the Overlord's informer. You start to run, calling, Hurry, or we may be too late. If word reaches them before us, they will flee the roost. You run fast and the others can hardly keep up. Entering the fruit market, you dive into a throng of people who are picking over a mound of rotting fruit that has been piled at the side of the road. As you make your escape into a narrow side street, you hear the crowd calling for your blood. It is not safe to remain in the city at the moment. Will you leave by the usual means, the main gate to the trade route, or try to slip from the city unseen? I think it's going to be all about slipping from the city unseen. This is a particularly savage pogrom, one that is not merely expelling the Judain from the city, but actively seeking to murder them. So I think it's going to be better to make my way out stealthily. You creep along side streets, hiding your face from strangers as you head towards the riverfront. You are plagued by midges, but that is the least of your troubles. You can hear shrieks and the cries of hysterical mobs behind you as they rampage back and forth across the city. Making your way carefully to the quay, you can see a row of 3 river barges, 2 laden with goods and 1 which has just finished unloading. Do you have seafaring? I do not. Which barge will you stow away on? The first is a big barge which is little more than a wide raft. It has a huge pile of lime for cargo. The second has just been unloaded. It is an ordinary grain barge. You can see rats scavenging the dropped grains of corn. The third is a smaller barge with a shallow draft. It is loaded with barrels under a tarpaulin. So of the 3, a huge pile of lime. I feel like I'll stand out next to a huge pile of lime. Again, an empty barge is going to be hard to stow away on. I feel as though only really the one with barrels under a tarpaulin offers me really good opportunities for hiding, so that is the one I'm going to take. An hour before dusk, the members of the crew return from whichever wine cellar they've been squandering their money in and prepare to cast off. They look over the cargo briefly, but do not notice you, huddled under a pile of ropes. They sing as they pole the barge, a sombre song with a pounding beat about how a man may toil his whole life away and at the end have nothing to show for it but the clothes he will die in. You guess from the movements of the barge that it has turned up the Palayal River. You are being borne towards the great forest. You guess they are making for the town of Bago, 20 miles upriver. You lie still, listening to the lapping waters at the bows and feeling the rhythmic surge as the crew drives the barge on, poling in time. After 3 hours of dirges, the crew tie up for the rest of the night against the deserted riverbank. While they snore, you leap from the barge to shore and walk inland to the Bago Road. Well, that escape went remarkably well. You make good progress along the rutted road by the light of the moon. Most goods are carried to Bago by river, so there are no brigands on this road. As the sun rises, you pass farms growing fruit and olives, vines and tomatoes, and the great purple humblo fruit which is so popular in Godorno. Every now and then the sweep of the Palayal River comes into view where road and river run side by side. You press on, hoping to reach Bago before the bargees from Godorno. He's very good at the old world building, Mark Smith. It was something I think we noticed a lot in The Way of the Tiger books, which obviously is the thing he's most famous for, but he is a bit good at the old world building. I think one of the things that's unusual is that he's someone who focuses quite a bit on the economic side and showing how places are linked together rather than thinking about places as discrete and self-contained entities, which is often the temptation when coming up with fantasy locations. Whereas the reality is, of course, that human societies are intrinsically connected to each other and depend on each other in all sorts of interesting ways. You are still miles from Bago, and your spirits are lifting as you find the farmers much more friendly than the city folk, though you dare not stop to chat. The workers in the fields wave solemn greetings as you pass. You wave back to one and notice he is looking from you back down the road. Turning back, you see a cloud of dust or smoke. Perhaps one of the farmers is burning off some old tomato plants. Do you have wilderness law? I do not. I don't think that's burning tomato plants somehow. You walk on, unconcerned, until you see the people ahead of you leaving their work in the fields and returning hurriedly to their farmhouses. Looking back down the road, you see the dust cloud is caused by a large group of horsemen clad in the Overlord's livery of purple and black. They have seen you and are calling for you to stop. Would you do as they say or try to hide in one of the farmhouses? Oh, this is a difficult decision because they are on horses, so they're going to be faster than me. There's quite a lot of them. That's going to make searching for me a bit easier. But equally, I don't particularly want to stop and be murdered by them. So I am going to reluctantly try and hide in one of the farmhouses. You reach the safety of one of the buildings just as the horsemen reach the first farmstead and begin torching it. There are nearly 30 of them, cruel-looking men and well-armed. Clearly, they are brigands who have donned the uniforms of the Overlord's men. The peasants have fled to the hills. Those who were too slow to make off with their most treasured possessions have to plead for their lives. If you have spells and a wand, you could rely on your magic to make yourself invisible. Otherwise, you will have to throw in your lot with them, hoping they will let you join their band. Well, that's a twist. I don't have magic, so we are going to be pleading with them, I guess. The brigands accept you into their band. And though the life is hard, you flourish. Within the year, you lead your own band, preying on the rich and overlooking the psychopathic excesses of your men. You are a successful brigand leader, but the Judain perish in Godorno. The next time you see the city, it has sunk into the sea, leaving only the tops of the fortresses and towers piercing the waves to show where the city that was once the jewel of the East now lies. The end. Well, I wasn't expecting that. Okay, maybe an ending where you wind up joining the brigands and becoming a brigand yourself. That's perfectly standard fantasy game book outcome. The city sinking into the waves, however, is much stranger and hints that as well as trying to save my people, I'm also potentially going to have to save the whole city as well. Obviously, it's too early to call a halt there, so we will try and find an interesting place to restart. Okay, so I guess thinking about the structure of the book, it feels as though the town crier bit is probably going to happen whatever you do during your playthrough, so that is the sort of the inciting incident for the adventure to kick in. So I'm going to go back and try stowing away on one of the different barges. So we will go back and try and stow away on the grain barge rather than the barge full of barrels. The barge full of rats scavenging dropped corn. To your dismay, the rats, instead of fleeing, set up an angry chittering, as if protesting at your trespass. They are sleek with grain, and their yellow teeth look needle-sharp. Some are more than a foot long and evil-looking. A bargee hears them and rouses a couple of his mates. They start ambling your direction. You must hurriedly hide either in the barge laden with lime or under the tarpaulin of the smallest of the barges. So we will go for the barge laden with lime. There is nowhere to hide but inside the lime. There is lime dust everywhere, and wherever you go, you leave a trail of chalky footsteps. You try and rub the footsteps away and burrow into the lime, leaving a small hole next to your nose to breathe through. As you lie there in the lime, you daren't move in case someone sees you. But what if a small part of you is uncovered? Your dark clothes will be spotted against the white lime. Your uncomfortable wait is ended when someone pokes a boat hook into your side. The bargees clear the lime away from your head under the eyes of a group of the Overlord's soldiers. "It's a Judain," says one of the soldiers. Their captain orders them to knock you out and throw you in the river. Stuck inside the heavy mound of lime, you are helpless as they cosh you over the head. You are food for the fishes. Okay, well, that didn't work as well as I might have hoped. I've died again, so we need a plan C. Okay, so I have explored the opening a little bit more thoroughly, and I don't think there's any option other than leaving the city via the barge. So the only point at which I can think there's an option for maybe doing something else other than what we've already explored in the playthrough so far is talking to the brigands instead of trying to run away from them and hide in the farmhouses. So that's what we will do. Your money or your life, comes the age-old cry from the leader. The horsemen are brigands disguised as the Overlord's men. Do you want to surrender everything you have to them, or join their merry band and live the next chapter of your life as a brigand? Well, we've tried that, and it works out reasonably well for us. Not so well for the other Judain, and not so well for Godorno as a place. So we'll surrender everything we have. The brigands strip you of everything useful and ride off down the trade road, leaving you nothing. There is much mirth at your plight and a certain amount of cursing that you are so poor. This one's gear will hardly pay for the horseshoe metal we wasted in the chase, grumbles one of them. Cross all money and possessions off your adventure sheet. It is obvious these men will forget about you as soon as you are out of sight. Just another victim on the road. At least they haven't harmed you. So, goodbye to our money, goodbye to our sword, and our knife. You are more fortunate later, however. Your journey to Bago on the Palial River is charmed. You find food dropped in a sack by the side of the path and are treated to a beer at an inn. At Bago, you are welcomed aboard a barge, and the bargees promise to hide you when you near Godorno. They say you will be easily able to slip ashore unseen in the dead of their night. They are as good as their word, and one fine dawn you find yourself back in Godorno, with the wharves and warehouses behind you and the city before you. The revetments of the building lend the city an unmistakable air of patrician hauteur. This is the hub of the civilized world. Okay, so we escape Godorno and then head straight back for reasons, and the book is extremely unhappy if you try and deviate from this by even a smidge. At last you face the noisome streets of the city once more. The facades of the palaces seem even more chipped and sullied than they were before you left. Several of the rows of grand villas along the riverfront and up the Grand Canal seem to have subsided several feet towards the waterline. Where once the roofline was an uninterrupted plain from one end of the canal to the other, it is now a crooked, saw-toothed succession of pinnacles and collapsed roofs. Something has shaken the city to its foundations while you have been away. Will you find a safe place to hide until the worst of the terror is over? Your old hovel on Copper Street is only a couple more miles tramped from here. You decide to go back there to find old friends. You see, that is an irritating thing. Basically asking you a question. Will you find a safe place to hide until the worst of the terror is over? Yes, you will, because I've decided that's what you're going to do. Kind of frustrating to suggest that there's a choice coming up and then remove it at the last minute. The road leading up to Greenbank Plaza has been renamed the Avenue of Skulls. At regular intervals, posts have been erected from which the iron cages swing. Inside the cages are executed Judain. Hundreds have been slain. The smell of rank corruption has drawn a cloud of flies. Nearby you hear a clang of a bell and the dolorous voice calling, "Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!" The plague has struck Godorno like a ravening scourge. No respecter of a man's station, it has carried off nobleman and beggar alike. The streets have not been swept for what must have been weeks. Refuse is piling up in drifts in the wind. There is a blank look of despair on the faces of the people you pass, and even the guards seem too preoccupied to notice a Judain. The sun is drawing the humours from the city like the fumes from a witch's kettle by the time you turn the corner into Copper Street. So there's a picture of the Avenue of Skulls. Gibbets hang with decaying bodies in them. Yeah, again, it's odd, it's strange, but it's quite nice. It really is quite nice. What is less nice to me is the sheer number of ideas being just jammed in here, one after the other. Is it a story about the oppression of the Judain? Is it a story about the city sinking into the waves? Is it a story about the city being scourged by plague? Apparently it's all three. You return to the hovel which you used to call home. You can use it as a base to see if you can contact some of your fellow Judain to learn what has taken place in the city. The old door has been broken up and used for firewood. There is nobody and nothing in the hovel. but you did hear voices from beneath the trapdoor that leads to the hidden cellar. Do you want to fling the trapdoor open, or do you want to knock first? Let's knock. You tap on the door, then kneel and place your ear to the planking to hear what goes on beneath. You can hear men whispering. They must fear you are one of the Overlord's men. You call out quietly your name and that you are Judain. At last you persuade them to open the trapdoor. Down in the cellar are the 3 families hiding from the Overlord's butchers. There is a big man whom you recognise as Caiaphas, the rabbi of the synagogue before it was torn down. He carries a rusty old spear which he casts aside as soon as he sees you. "Caiaphas, my old friend," you say in greeting. "What has come to pass here? Why do all our people cower below ground like rats?" Caiaphas looks sombre, and one of the women starts to cry as he tells the story in a rumbling basso voice, which would be most impressive were he not cowering in a damp cellar. There's a picture of Caiaphas and the cowering people. Yeah, again, pretty good. Pretty good. The people are mostly quite young, but they're dirty and look suitably frightened. One thing I am finding with this book is that it is powerfully linear, and that's always a little bit of a disappointment. It's feeling kind of like a novel that the author really wanted to just write as a novel, but was persuaded that it would be easier to sell as a game book because the author was a noted game book author, and so it's been grudgingly turned into a game book. I feel as though it probably would have been a better novel than a game book thus far. The themes are really interesting, but they actually need more space and more exposition than you can really put in a game book. Caiaphas' story of what has been the fate of their many friends is chilling. As soon as you fled the city, the Overlord's guards, along with foreign mercenaries who marched out of beyond, started to round up all the Judain they could find. The executions have been carried out all day, every day since then. A few, like you, escaped from the city. Several thousand have gone to ground, but most of your folk have already perished. You vow then and there to avenge your fellow Judain. "This is even worse than I have said," continues Caiaphas. "Some have reported seeing a loathsome monster dragging its bulk through the streets at night. None knows where it comes from, but by daybreak there are always fewer people in the city." "What is it?" you ask aghast. "Hate itself, the embodiment of cruelty. It has been awakened and given living form by the Overlord's excesses. Now it stalks the streets beyond even his power to control, and it will not rest until our city has become a desolate ruin." You hear his words with horror. "But Caiaphas, did no one fight back? Did all our people just surrender themselves to be led away meekly to the slaughter like sheep?" "We must fight," Caiaphas, a tall man with a black beard and a rumbling basso, replies. "You are a fine one to criticize us. Where were you? We could not fight. We have no swords nor heavy suits of mail to protect us. There are too few of us." "Surely there is someone among us who will strike back, someone prepared to stand up to the evil of the accursed Overlord?" Caiaphas has not heard of any such resistance group, though he can get messages through to the large number of Judain who are in hiding throughout the city. "Who is our leader now?" you ask. "Are the elders all dead and gone?" Anas, a small man with a quavering flute-like voice, tells you, "They were taken together as they met in the synagogue to discuss the Overlord's edict." "And did all the folk of the city just stand by?" "Yes, they did, or denounced us to the guards." There are sounds from the street above. An iron-tired cart is being pulled past the smashed door to the hovel. You wait for it to pass before lowering your voice to say, "How safe are we down here?" "As safe as anywhere," is Caiaphas's opinion. "But do you plan to just stay here for the rest of your lives?" He just shrugs helplessly. "What do you do for food?" you go on. "We have enough food and water for another 2 weeks, puts in Anas. "And what then?" Again they shrug. "We must do something. Organise ourselves, band together for our own protection." "It would accomplish nothing," Caiaphas replies despondently. Will you immediately organise a resistance movement among the Judain or remain in hiding in the cellar while formulating a plan? A choice, at last, a choice! Is it a real choice, or does one of these choices lead to certain destruction? I feel as though one of the choices probably leads to certain destruction, and I'm guessing it's the option to remain hiding in the cellar. So that's what I'm going to do just out of morbid curiosity. You grow steadily weaker on the meagre diet of scraps. Lose 2 life points. Well, I think it's really interesting to create game books that don't have a combat system, that don't have dice. I think fights can be useful, particularly in linear game books, to break up the flow of the text and give the reader the impression that they're somehow contributing to events. Even though you don't have a choice about doing the fight necessarily, the fact that you're rolling dice, the fact that you are taking an active role in the story can create a bit more immersion in what's otherwise kind of just a list of things that happen to you. Since it is too dangerous to risk lighting a fire, some of the others suggest catching rats and salting strips of their flesh to eat when the rations run out. The thought is as revolting to you as it is to Caiaphas, the rabbi. Is it our destiny to spend our last days like ravening beasts? He asks. No, we are the chosen people. Let us go forth and die gloriously against the overlord's men. He snatches up his spear and climbs the steps to the trapdoor, but then you call out something that stops him in his tracks, and he and the other Judain all turn to look at you in a new light. Die gloriously, you say. Why do that, when we can win? For the first time in days there is a look of hope in their eyes. They wait to hear your plan. You must not let them down. So, rather than giving us a choice of plans, we're just told that we've come up with a plan. Nice. This is starting to just very gently get on my wick, which is a shame because I do think the situation is fascinating. It's a lot grittier. The parallels with real history are so much stronger than in a lot of game books. This is much more adult fare in terms of the themes that it's addressing and the relatively unflinching way it asks the reader to confront uncomfortable elements of European history. All of that stuff I like a lot. I just don't think it's a very good game book. I just feel as though I'm not really involved. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just being led by the nose from one plot point to the next. The Judain have long had a system for moving gold around the city unseen. They now carry messages in the same way, using dives and backstreets, safe houses, and sometimes even the catacombs. You can contact all the Judain through them, but their morale is low. So many of their kith and kin have been carried off to Grond. Do not despair. Are we not a proud people, you say? We have many advantages. First, the Overlord fears us, or why else would he turn his guards against us? Second, we know the secret ways beneath the city, and we can already pass messages without fear of interception. Third, we have a leader now. Me. Caiaphas protests. But what can we do? We are not armed. Each of us has already lost a loved one, swinging in an iron cage. We will all suffer the same fate if we come out of hiding. Then we will stay hidden. Strike only at night, always in a different part of the city. Let us strike fear into the hearts of the good burghers of Godorno. Let no one say the Judain are cowards. And we have money stashed in the vaults under the warehouses in the Crescent Canal Avenue. How much? A talent, the weight of a man in gold. This is unlooked-for good news. The cunning Judain can do much with their money. Men can be bought as easily in the god-forsaken city of Godorno as anywhere. Will you suggest holding a meeting in one of the old warehouses on Crescent Avenue? Give the word to stay hidden, but organise into cells of 5 people, each with a different target. So, I quite like the idea of forming little kind of, terrorist cells. Terrorist, freedom fighter, however you want to slice it. It does sort of seem as though we might be looking at engaging in a little light terrorism, and I'm interested to see whether that's the case. I think that's the one we're going to go with. You muse on the good fortune of finding your fellows so well provided for. A talent, more than I could have hoped for in my wildest dreams. With a talent of gold we can buy all the help we need. Ah, but taking gold from Judain is a capital offence punishable by impalement. Even talking to a Judain is a capital offence unless you are interrogating one. Are we not the Judain? Have we not the merchant's silver tongue? We have never wanted for those to do our bidding in the past. In the past, the people were not in the grip of fear. Where once they thought of lining their pockets, they can now count themselves lucky if they can line their stomachs and stay out of trouble. That is a strange thing. I feel as though one of those sentences that's separated by quotation marks should actually have been part of the previous sentence. So I think we've ended up swapping over who the people speaking are in a weird way. I think the sentence, but taking gold from Judain is a capital offence punishable by impalement. Even talking to a Judain is a capital offence unless you are interrogating one, should have been Caiaphas speaking rather than Caiaphas and then the Avenger speaking, because we've ended up, swapping over. A little bit bizarre. So we got to this point because we decided to organise into cells, and literally no mention of 5-man cells or 5-person cells has been made whatsoever. Your allies suggest various places for you to make a hideout, and you choose a damp cellar on Medallion Street. It seems the best option. You are on your way there when there is a commotion ahead of you. Seeing a group of city guards approaching, you duck into the ruin of an abandoned building. To your dismay, they stop in the street outside, and you hear one of them say, "A Judain went in here, I think. Fetch the dogs, they'll soon sniff the wretch out." There is a frightened whimper in the darkness behind you. You whirl to see Caiaphas's wife, Ruth, the one who was reluctant to share the food with you. No, she wasn't. This is the first time I think Ruth has even been mentioned. You remember hearing from Caiaphas that she is with child. She is hidden, trembling behind a pillar at the back of the hall. You know that the guards will not return to barracks unless they have their quota of court Judain. Do you have roguery and want to use it? Do you have charms? Do you have streetwise? If you have none of those skills, you can either dash out into the street and fight the guards to buy Ruth time to escape, or push her out into the street to save yourself. Surely they will not harm a pregnant woman. Well, I think they will. I think they'll harm a pregnant woman very happily indeed. But happily we have streetwise, and hopefully that will get us out of this very sticky situation. It looks like there is no back exit from this building, but you recall seeing a trapdoor in the alley running behind it. Dragging the frightened Ruth behind you, you descend to the cellar. Sure enough, there is a ramp for delivery of wine barrels. You make your escape, emerging in the alley at the back of the house while the soldiers are bursting in the front way. Ruth cannot thank you enough. "My baby will be born thanks to you," she sobs as you lead her back to Copper Street. "I hope to save many others," you tell her. "All our people, in fact." Once she is safe with Caiaphas, you return to your own bolt hole. At last you manage to regain the safety of the underground cellars. There is a hole in the ceiling through which you can be spied on from the road unless you move back against the back wall, but the other Judain have taken all the best bolt holes. You will find a better hideaway in time. Will you drag the palliasse to the back where it cannot be seen through the hole in the roof, or will you sleep on the street side near the hole? I guess we'll do the obvious thing that won't get us killed. Drag that palliasse. You drag the pallet into the murk beside the back wall and fall into an unnaturally deep slumber. You dream of searching a forest for your lost mother. You awake feeling nauseous. You move to turn over and find a trail of viscous slime across your outstretched arm, like the track of a gigantic slug. Gagging, you feel vomit burn the back of your throat. If you have the code word Venefix, then your arm is permanently withered, and now you cannot use swordplay or agility. Cross them off your adventure sheet if you had them. Well, I don't have the code word Venefix. If you have the code word Satori, you wash off the slime in a barrel of rainwater and find you are unscathed. I have neither. That is not an option. I have broken this book somehow. Yeah, and I think that's probably the point at which I'm going to stop, because the thought of going back to try and work out where I broke it is not massively appealing to do on mic. I will do it. I'm interested to try and work out how you get Venefix and how you get Satori. I feel as though you're presumably supposed to have one or the other by this point. So maybe I went to just simply the wrong section. That's a possibility. I'm going to have to go back and start again from the beginning, I think, and work my way through, which I will do on my own time. So, a mixed bag for me, for sure. There's a lot to like, but there is a lot that is frustrating, in particular, just how very linear it is. But anyway, I'm going to go and play it more extensively on my own time. Often linear books are a little bit less irritating when I'm not reading them out loud. That has an impact. So it's possible I may warm to it more when I'm not constantly looking for the next choice to discuss. I'll be back for you in just a few moments with some closing remarks. Tatty bye. I have finished Coils of Hate, and I have to say I was left feeling somewhat confused and disappointed. I was confused because this is a barely functional mess of a gamebook, and I was disappointed because, unlike a lot of bad gamebooks, there's the tantalising hint of something really special lurking beneath the grime. There are reasons why this one turned out the way it did, and I think it's worth dwelling on what those involved have said on the record. By all accounts, Mark Smith was not especially gifted at the mechanical side of gamebook design and had a number of things going on in his life that meant this book didn't get the attention it needed, leaving Dave Morris to do the editing work necessary to turn Smith's incoherent manuscript into something approaching playability. There seems to have been a perfect storm of factors coming together to sink Coils of Hate, not least that for all my recorded playthrough wound up being quite linear, there's actually a devilishly complex structure underneath, which involves quite a degree of player freedom. Probably the main author might have been well advised not to tackle a book this complex as a solo effort without the support of Jamie Thompson, his writing partner from Way of the Tiger, who handled a lot of the mechanics in that series, allowing Smith to play to his strengths as a designer of narrative and setting. I think it's fair to say that what we got significantly exposed the author's weaknesses in a way that made it much harder for his strengths to come to the fore. And it's important to remember that behind every gamebook there's a team of real human beings with real lives who are just trying to get by in the world as best they can. That said, I think the publishers, Mammoth Books, were borderline negligent in putting this book out even after Dave Morris had done what he could to make it make sense. For all that I strive to be compassionate, there's also the reality that this was a piece of commercial fiction, retailing at $4.99 in the UK on release, and if you put down money for it, whether it's the $4.99 it originally cost or the £20 it cost me to pick it up second hand, then you're entitled to expect something that makes sense and functions as intended. I don't think there's any argument you can make that Coils of Hate functions as intended. I should stress that I don't personally feel like I wasted my money. It's a historical curiosity, a weird little footnote in the history of gamebooks, and that's always going to be sufficiently interesting for me to consider it a wise investment. But there were genuine moments playing Coils of Hate where I found myself getting quite angry. If I'd spent my own cash on it in 1993, I think I'd have been absolutely furious. It's not often a gamebook makes me angry because much as I love gamebooks, I recognise that they aren't actually important in the grand scheme of things. There's much better things to be getting angry about. I think there's one big reason why Coils of Hate got uncharacteristically under my skin, and it has to do with my own particular psychological makeup. Playing Coils of Hate can be very frustrating at times, and that frustration feels very similar to the frustration I experience as someone with dyslexia. There are certain small things I really struggle with, like reading off long strips of numbers in the right order and spelling certain words. While I'm a fluent reader, I don't always read the same way as other people do, and I have a tendency to struggle with big chunks of text, and sometimes I'll just miss entire sentences because my brain has just jumped to entirely the wrong bit of the paragraph. And the fact is that these are not in the abstract difficult tasks, and I find it exceptionally frustrating not to be able to do them perfectly. The natural response to making a mistake in these situations is to concentrate harder, to try and do better. But one of the paradoxes of dyslexia is that the harder I concentrate on words or strings of numbers, the less easy I find it to actually decode them. They just start swimming more and more the harder I look at them. Coils of Hate constantly made me feel like I'd missed something. It constantly made me feel like I'd screwed up. and my natural instinct in these circumstances is to blame myself, except it wasn't me. Okay, sometimes it was me. Sometimes it was definitely me. But mostly it was the book effortlessly mirroring the effects of dyslexia and making me feel stupid in the same way I can remember feeling stupid as a 5-year-old. These are the feelings that stay with you, and it's not nice to be reminded of them by a thing that's supposed to be fun. Now, obviously, I can't blame the people responsible for Coils of Hate for creating an association between their work and some buried trauma of my own. That is hardly fair. But I can say categorically that this book is a buggy mess. And if it had been written and edited properly, then it wouldn't have had that effect on me. They aren't responsible for my specific response to the work, but equally they are responsible for turning out something so broken that it perfectly simulates the effect of having a developmental disability. I don't want to do an exhaustive tour of the errors of this book, but they are extensive and pervasive. The least interesting errors, but the most frustrating to deal with, are those of continuity, because they feel like the result of a simple lack of care. Some of the continuity errors are not small. You leave the city and it seems you're away for a couple of days, but when you get back it's clear that weeks or even months have passed. Characters get mentioned who you've never met. At one point you go to seek a final confrontation with a hate monster that is devouring the city, but the text just forgets that's the alleged aim of the portion of the book. It's possible to have the revolution against the Overlord go extremely badly and extremely well almost simultaneously. There are apparently no brigands on the road to Bago, but also there are brigands. You appear surprised to find the Judain in hiding, even though you literally fled the pogrom yourself and on your return saw gibbets filled with the bodies of other Judain. Are the Judain rich or poor? Trick question, it's both or possibly neither. You can hear a spider breathing at one point, and spiders don't breathe in and out like mammals. They have an arrangement of tubes, which does passive gas exchange rather than expanding and contracting a diaphragm to inflate lungs. That last one is a small thing, but it really irritated me, and I wasn't inclined to be charitable at that stage. In order to win, you need to lug around a couple of 100 feet of chain, and it's not at all clear how that's arranged. There's an NPC who dies, and it's very sad, except that you may not actually have met her before, and the book assumes you have a deep history. At one point you get the opportunity to murder the Overlord, and the book refuses to give you the option to stab him in his sleep, despite that being the obvious thing to do. More of that later. It says it's going to give you the option, but never actually does. I could go on. Playing Coils of Hate feels like losing your grip on sanity at times. This is all simply bad design through lack of effort. It's shoddy workmanship, pure and simple, and that's both frustrating, but also quite dull to talk about. There's actually some much more interesting problems with the book that I do think illuminate some lessons about gamebook design that are more exciting than try and make sure there's some causal link between the things that happen in your gamebook, or try and make sure your world has the concept of object permanence. The first thing I want to examine in a bit more detail is the morality system, such as it is. Morality systems are a bit of a minefield for gamebooks. Not only is morality somewhat subjective, it's also very hard to create a system that can mechanically account for a range of different offences against natural justice. The usual approach is to have some kind of stat which ticks either down or up to track good and bad deeds, and the problem with that is that it becomes inherently transactional. You end up with a system where stealing an orange 5 times is the karmic equivalent of stabbing someone with a screwdriver after an argument in a B&Q. Equally, there may be some number of little old ladies you can help across the road, which would ameliorate that one little old lady you hit with your car that one time. Not to mention all the things that morality systems tend to decide are morally neutral, such as the wholesale slaughter of orcs while searching for treasure. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't put a morality system in your gamebook. They can be powerful tools, but they need a degree of care and attention, and I think if you're going to do it, then it needs to be a significant focus of your book. You need to think about the boundaries of your morality system, and ideally make those boundaries as narrow as possible. Something like a knightly code is good for this, as it provides a list of transgressions which can easily be operationalised into a gamebook setting, but which doesn't attempt to cover all known moral situations. A knight is very comfortable with the idea of stabbing people to death, but might be very down on oath-breaking or cowardice. I would also argue for making your morality system one-directional. Make it so that you can either lose points in a morality stat for transgressing the rules, or gain points in the morality stat for doing good deeds, for going above and beyond the normal human basic moral framework. The former is perhaps best suited to characters trying to live up to some challenging ideal and failing, while the latter could be used to express doing good deeds which a particular god or patron approves of. A good example of the latter approach would be a follower of the god of war and violence, Khorne from the Warhammer universe. Khorne couldn't care less whether you've cheated on your taxes or given a homeless person a few quid. Khorne only cares about bloodshed and carnage, and that's a nice, easy thing to represent in a gamebook. Having a unidirectional morality system avoids falling into the trap of moral equivalence, which makes morality systems feel very transactional, much like the system of indulgences in the medieval church, whereby almost any sin could be expiated if your pockets were deep enough. You don't have to use a score system. Another approach, and the one taken here, is to track morality with keywords. This has some advantages. It allows you to treat morality as situational and contingent. Perhaps the religious goat people care an awful lot about eating cheese on a Friday, but the rest of the world is significantly less bothered. A keyword lets you track whether you have transgressed this specific rule in the situations where you encounter the cheese-eating goat people. Keywords let you apply morality when it matters most to the plot. It's probably not the best system to use if you're going to make morality a central feature, since you'll wind up with loads of keywords, and you always want to strive to keep your keywords under control so that your gamebook doesn't become an exercise in constantly poring over lists of opaque but suggestive words. Coils of Hate tracks your morality with two different keywords, effectively one that flags you as being in a state of sin and one that flags you as being in a state of grace. This already falls into the trap of being a bidirectional morality system with all the transactionalism that implies. The biggest problem is that a two-keyword system can only track your last moral action. You can sin as much as you like, so long as you then do something good which will wipe away all trace of your previous nefarious actions. A two-keyword system is also a very imprecise way of tracking good and evil, since there's no nuance available. While there's problems with the score-based approach of assigning numerical values to moral actions, it does allow you to differentiate, however problematically, between murder and shoplifting. This is a great example of a book where a score-based morality would have been the better option, with the book requiring that you keep your morality stat above a certain value in order to gain access to the endgame. Another area where I think Coils of Hate is bad in an interesting way is the fashion in which it presents choices, and this is one of the most fundamental skills in gamebook writing, so it's always interesting to see it done a little bit wrong. Now, the real world is a messy place, with a theoretically infinite number of possible actions a person can take at any given moment. In practice, most of our choices are much more constrained than that. Once we've decided we're going to eat dinner at Pizza Hut, our actual choices become limited to whatever filth is on the menu. A key part of the art of gamebook writing is creating the illusion that the simple choices the book offers represent the totality of actions that a reasonably sensible person might consider in that situation. A secondary, but equally important skill is deciding when to offer the player a choice and when to allow the scene to play out. Again, in theory, we have freedom of action at all points in our life, but many situations have scripts attached to them. In psychology, these scripts are part of a broader construct called the schema, which reflects how the human brain typically organises information for easier processing. Good gamebook writers have a feel for these schema and know instinctively to offer their choices between the schema and allow the schema to play out as they normally would. Going back to our Pizza Hut example, you might have a choice about exactly what to eat, but the script for eating a meal says that you generally eat your starter first, followed by the main course, and then the dessert if you have room. You don't have to follow that script, but the vast majority of people will. In gamebook terms, that means that you ask the player what they would like to order, but you don't bother asking them what order they would like to eat it in. You let the schema do the work naturally. Coils of Hate struggles with these fundamentals of choice. It has a knack for offering choices that feel like they're coming too early or too late in the narrative structure. Perhaps the best example is when the book asks you if you want to come up with a plan or not, and then gives you no input into the actual plan that is formed. This is subtly, but obviously wrong. You're in a terrible situation. Of course you want to come up with a plan. That's not the interesting bit. The interesting bit would have been deciding between a range of different plans that might get you out of that situation and seeing how they pan out. Similarly, once you've decided to go and meet someone, the book asks you whether you want to knock on his door or give up. That's like asking someone if they want to eat the food they've ordered and paid for, or if they've changed their mind. It's the wrong bit of the schema. Once you've met the guy, you've decided to ask for help, the book then asks you whether you'd like to try and kill him. Again, technically, you can go round to borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbour and change your mind and attack them instead, but it doesn't really feel like most people's script for running out of sugar midway through a baking session. In some ways, this is perhaps the most frustrating part of playing Coils of Hate if you don't have my particular brain wrong. There's a sense that you're being offered the wrong choices at the wrong times, and it compounds especially badly with the book's issues around logical consistency. The worst example is definitely being in the same room as the diabolical overlord who has murdered your people and not being given the chance to exact revenge. It's not even that the book punishes you for trying to take revenge. The option for revenge just isn't there. Instead, you can try to kidnap the overlord's concubine who is lying in bed with him. And why would you do that? Why would you offer this as the only possible solution to the situation? It's madness. It's a gigantic oversight, and there are plenty of other examples of similar, albeit less egregious lapses in decision-making logic. It's one of those things you don't notice at all when it's done well, but if it's even a fraction off, you'll notice at once. Something I think that is made much harder by the urban setting and the commendable desire of the author to give you a certain freedom of action. In a dungeon setting, often it's do you want to go down the left corridor or the right corridor? The choices are constrained as much by the geography as anything else, and I think it's a lot easier to write that sort of thing from a functional perspective. I think it's very hard to make it really, really entertaining. I think a lot of dungeons are quite dull, but functionally speaking, it's quite easy. The skills are similarly oddly implemented. There's a lot of situations where multiple different skills will get you out of the same situation, and there's a lot of crossover thematically between the different skills. Roguery, cunning, and streetwise feel very similar, and could probably have been compressed into a single skill with a more general application. Sword fighting and unarmed fighting are not really very different in terms of how they affect the story, although the book is weirdly obsessed with you losing your sword. Probably unarmed fighting doesn't need to be there, honestly. There are 3 knowledge skills: folklore, wilderness lore, and seafaring, and they're all as near to useless as makes no odds. Strangely enough, neither seafaring nor wilderness lore comes up much in an adventure almost entirely focused on urban environments. Folklore will give you the odd useful hint, but it's nothing the text won't tell you elsewhere. On the other hand, the ability to cast spells is extremely, some might say disproportionately useful in a vast range of situations. Given there's no combat system, the skills are the main mechanical device here, and they are very clumsily implemented, but in a vaguely interesting way. Yeah, the lesson is straightforward. Don't have more skills than you need, and make sure all of your skills serve a separate purpose within the story. That covers all the big ways that Coils of Hate sucks, but I want to finish on a more positive note by talking about some of the things the book actually does well, because it's by no means a dead loss. The big thing is that the themes are really interesting when the author manages to let them be the focus. You essentially have 2 stories being told, which are thematically linked. There's the oppression of the Judain, with all its not-so-subtle parallels with the very real sufferings endured by the Jewish people over many centuries, and there's a story about how hate itself is a corrosive force which turns in on itself. Again, subtlety is not the author's strong suit, so that hate manifests itself as a giant monster called hate that absorbs people into itself. I don't mind the lack of subtlety at all. In a game book, you're often going to want to lay your cards on the table because a lot of the word count necessarily involves functional things, and that doesn't always leave a great deal of room to get your themes across. But to quote Garth Marenghi, he's heard of people that use subtext, and they're all cowards. Positioning the character as a fictionalised analogue for the Jewish people is something very fresh and different in a game book, and it allows the author to explore some of the trauma of a world where Western history is thoroughly intertwined with anti-Semitism. The list of Jewish pogroms is a long one and includes significant acts of violence in the British Isles as recently as 1936. It's a bloody and precarious history which obviously reaches an apogee in the horrors of the Holocaust. There's a tendency to see anti-Semitism as an organised force as being a relatively recent arrival on the scene, and while it's true that the so-called scientific racism that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries metastasised in unique ways with the development of nationalism in the same period to create types of racism in general and anti-Semitism in particular that had not previously existed, the roots of anti-Semitism run deep in the history of Western society, and Coils of Hate does a sporadically interesting job of exploring a community response to organised violence in a context that feels kind of like Renaissance Italy. Henry VIII expelled all the Jewish people from England at one point, and the first victims of the First Crusade, theoretically designed to retake the Holy Land from the Muslim conquerors of that territory, was in fact European Jews. So this is an unusual and challenging thing for a gamebook aimed at teenagers to take on, and I'm always going to commend a writer for doing the difficult thing. Of course, there is an irony that the Overlord's brutality, which we see in Coils of Hate, has more than a few echoes in the atrocities which the Israeli state has been inflicting on Gaza in recent years. This is a situation where a grounding in anarchist interpretations of history is helpful, because what the Overlord and the current Israeli government have in common is that they are both heavily militarised states, and heavily militarised states do terrible things to those they perceive as their enemies. There is nothing exceptional about the current Israeli government as compared to Russia, America, or even Iran, and the state of Israel is not a synecdoche for the Jewish people as a whole. This is somewhat relevant because the second major theme of Coils of Hate is that hate itself is fundamentally self-destructive. I think this is part of what the book was trying to get at with the rather crudely implemented morality system. The notion that hate only consumes, and we can only build things when we move beyond hate. And this is very nicely conveyed by the climax of the book, which is easily the best part for me. It has you shackling the unsubtle hate monster with the very chains you took off the prisoners in the city jail before setting fire to it with a magical jewel you nicked. Ignore that second part, the morality of that is all over the place, but the first bit is a lovely expression of the idea that overcoming hate means freeing people from its shackles. It means that the book does end with a serious bang. A final confrontation with a terrible monster, and a recognition that the human beings who inadvertently summoned it are as much a symptom of a problem as a direct cause. Whenever the hate monster appears, there is a palpable sense of dread and doom, which I thought was very nicely conveyed. If the writing had been tightened up and the structure largely improved, this book could have been something really special, because the ending in particular hints at a really, really gripping story with important, relevant themes to talk about. There are some other fun elements as well. We get a character moonlighting from Way of the Tiger and Talisman of Death, which suggests this story may be taking place on Orb, Thompson and Smith's fantasy world of choice. Some of the NPCs are nicely drawn as well, although some of them really aren't. The city feels like another character at times, the sense of crumbling grandeur and things falling slowly into the sea through the weight of moribund centuries. That is tremendous. So even though I've been very harsh about this book on a functional level, there is actually plenty of stuff in there which I admire. I just wish it actually, worked. Thank you very much to James for the request. I found it fascinating. There will be a link to Stuart Lloyd's remixed version of the book in the show notes, and from what I gather, it does a good job of keeping the themes of Coils of Hate intact while reworking it into something that you might actually want to play. So I suggest you take the opportunity to have a look at that rather than shelling out for the original, unless, you like studying flawed game books like me, in which case knock yourself out. That is all for this unusually heavy instalment of my silly podcast about game books. I hope you'll join me next time when I'll be playing one of the few remaining fighting fantasy books, Ian Livingstone's Shadow of the Giants. I think we all know what to expect from that, so it'll be nice to be on much safer ground. Hopefully it doesn't make me spend so much time thinking about human rights abuses through history. If you want to get in touch with me in the meantime and recommend something you'd like to hear me play and dissect, you can email me at hjdoom or retrofun, all one word, at gmail.com, or you can follow me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. This has been a production of Doom Industries. Thank you very much for listening, take care, and I'll see you soon.